So today, or this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about item types. And specifically, what I want to talk about today are enhancements in item types in the 2022 Release 1 software. Just a side note on that, if you hadn't received notification already, we did release the OpenRoads Designer 2022 Release 1 software last night. So that is now currently available for you to download from Bentley Downloads and begin taking a look at immediately. So that's what we're going to be focusing on this morning and covering. As Scott mentioned, please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A window. I have a wonderful team of people here with me today that will be answering questions during the presentation. And we've also left time at the end here. At the end of the hour, we'll have a good bit of time available to answer additional questions then, if you have them. So let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation. Now, there's a lot about item types that we could cover. Today, I'm going to focus on what's new in this new release of software. If you happen to be new to item types and you're not really sure what they are, or you need a little bit of review on some of the other things, I want to point you back to a couple other presentations that we did earlier this year. There's one called Item Type Fundamentals Part 1, and that presentation focuses on the real fundamentals, kind of the core of item types. What are item types? What are these things that we call item type properties? And how do we set up pick lists? Pick lists can be internal in DGN files, or they can be external through spreadsheets. We cover how to set all of that up in there. We talk about what's called calculated properties or expressions, and you'll hear me talk about that quite a bit today, but if you're new to it and you're trying to figure out the core of, okay, how do I even get the basics set up? This is the presentation you're going to want to go back and visit. One of those special types of expressions that you can build are lookups, where you can reach out to a spreadsheet and look up some data and bring that back in and attach it to your graphic elements. So that also is covered here. There is a link to this session in the resource list, one of the little pods that you have available in the On24 environment. So if you want to get back to that, you can go to that link there. You can also find it directly in the products, bring up your connection client, search on item type fundamentals, and you should be able to find links in there. We did a second presentation, I believe around the June timeframe, a couple months back. There's also a precursor to this, and this presentation got into using item types with civil data. So taking that fundamentals of item types a little bit further and talking about how do we attach those onto feature definitions, so that when you create a geometry line or when you run a corridor and you use a template that builds a mesh, how do I get item types on those elements automatically? How do I set up default values that go on those elements automatically? So we discussed that in here. We talk a lot about something called single source of truth, which is this ability within the civil environment to have a synchronized item type between your 2D, your 3D, and your profile spaces, so that you don't have things out of sync across those different models. We'd also discuss in here a bit about what we call propagation, prioritization, and conflict resolution. Think about having two pieces of geometry, maybe two lines, and they each had different, or both of them had the same item type on it, but they had different values. And then you complex that line together. Well, you're going to have a conflict there. Which item type do I keep? Because it's the same item type, but it's got two different values. That's where we get into this propagation, prioritization, and conflict resolution and how you can control that in your environment. We talk in this session a bit about what's called Asset Manager. And I'm going to refer back to that a little bit today, because in your current release, Asset Manager is used to do something to compute station and offset values. You're going to see today that we've got a new way to do that where you no longer need Asset Manager. And then the last thing that this presentation covers are some different ways to use item types once they're on your graphic elements. So different ways to do annotations and labeling and display, control your display. Maybe you want to highlight the elements that have item types on it, or highlight elements that are missing item types using display rules and display styles. There's an items browser to help you search and find data that has item types on it. And we touch a little bit on reports in here. So lots and lots of content there that I want to point you back to. If you haven't seen those or you're new to item types, go and visit those. The links are in your resource list or in the connection client. So with that, what are we going to talk about today then? Well, here's the agenda, what I want to speak about. We're going to talk about civil properties in the expression builder and some new expressions that we've included to compute stations and offsets. We're also going to talk about some new ways that you can control how item types are displayed in the user interface. So you can customize the environment to how you want it to work for you. We'll talk about item types related to drainage elements. I want to spend a bit of time on something called last valid value. Make sure you understand what that does and why it's really important to have that set properly to get item types to behave the way you expect them to. Some new capabilities that we'll talk about today around pick lists, the ability to build what we call a hierarchical pick list, or one pick list based on another. Some new support for lookup spreadsheets with special characters and spaces. Some new expressions to compute latitudes and longitude values, and some new ways to place text along with your item types. So those are the topics we'll hit today. So with that, let's jump right into it. And let's first talk about one of the topics that, to me, there's 2 or 3 on that list that are just super exciting that we've been able to bring to you now. And this is one of them. And it's the ability for you to write expressions for civil properties and know what that expression needs to be. If you've done this in the past, you've probably run into the challenge of, okay, I want to get at this property, but what the heck is the format of this expression I need to put in there to return a particular value? We've shared around some spreadsheets that had some limited values in there in the past, but there were also other values you just couldn't get to. What we're exposing now in the new software is the ability to get at virtually any civil property through item type expressions, or what we call an EC expression. You can do this in the expression builder by typing civil element properties. When you type a dot, you'll get a pick list, kind of like you're seeing on the screen there, and it'll navigate you down through that structure. We've also given you the ability to copy those EC expressions directly from the properties dialog. Let's look a little deeper at how this works. So if I'm in the expression builder and I start typing civil element properties, enter a dot, the IntelliSense will take over and it'll present for you the next possible options that exist in the expression at that point. So things like corridor, drainage and utilities, geometry, overhead line, rail, etc. Pick one of those from the list, click a dot again, it's going to show you the next possible list of options that are available. Now, if you're familiar with Text Favorite Manager, if you've ever set up any text favorites, you'll see that this list is the same list. The structure behind these is the same. So yes, it can get a bit complex in navigating down through all the possible things there, but it is the same structure that exists between text favorites and item type properties. Now, because that can get kind of complex, we've also given you another way to get at those. This is probably what I'd expect most of you are going to be doing, and that is go select an element, you look at that property that you want to see in the properties dialog, right click on it, and there's a choice there called Copy EC Expression. And then you could paste that expression into your expression builder. So then you don't have to worry about trying to navigate through the tree of how do I find that. I can get to it directly. I said it earlier, but I'm going to repeat it again. This should open up access to virtually any civil properties that you can get to. So all the same things that you can get to through text favorites, you can now get to through EC expressions or include in your item type expressions. Now, an important thing to note here is the Copy EC expression under the right click in the properties window is not available by default in your interface. It's hidden by default. Some administrators don't want that exposed necessarily to everybody. So you have the control of whether or not you want that available in your environment or not. There's a configuration variable to set, civil property EC expression equals 1, if you want that enabled in your environment. So let's take a look at that in action a little bit. So here I've got a item type property with a blank expression in it right now. And the first thing I'm going to do is use the IntelliSense. So as I start typing, it presents to me the next available options. So if I put in another dot here, I can get to the features under the geometry, then maybe down to the feature with name, and keep drilling down until I get to the piece I want. Once you get to the end of an expression, you'll see the parentheses automatically pop up there, so you know there's no more options after that. So you can certainly use the IntelliSense and type those in. The other way I could go about this is I could select an element. Here I'm going to select the centerline geometry. Go over and pick a civil feature or civil property. Right-click, choose Copy Expressions, and then I just did a Control V to paste it into my expression builder. You see it's the exact same expression no matter which way I go. For me, I like copying and paste them in. It's a lot easier. Here I've pasted in the feature definition expression just by right-clicking on it and pasting it in. This works across different types of civil elements. So move over to my 3D space, select a mesh element, copy in the volume, for example, and grab that. Or maybe move back to my 2D space, and here's a drainage inlet. Might want to grab the invert elevation property off the drainage and utilities and paste that in there. So very easy now to get to those civil properties within your item type expressions. Next, I want to talk about a new set of expressions that we have added. And these are for computing stations and offsets relative to some other alignment. And what's really important about these expressions is they behave just like any other EC or item type expression. The values in those are always up to date. So unlike what you had with the asset manager before, where if the item, the element, the graphic element that the item type was on moved or changed, or if the reference geometry changed, those station or offset values would be out of date. With this, they won't be. These will be evaluated instantaneously, just like any other expression. The values are returned as numeric values, which gives you a lot of power to do mathematical operations with them, or customize the formatting, how you want things to be displayed. Now I'm going to talk about station here today. That's going to be the example that I'm going to use. But if you see on the screen there, there's also values for elevations and offsets and station equation names. You can incorporate all of that into your naming as well. So let's take a look at the format behind these. So the basic format to these expressions begins with civil expression, dot, and then the actual expression. Station start, station end, offset start, offset end, etc. Then in parentheses, I pass to it the name of the geometry that I want to compute that station relative to. So in this example that I've got up right now, I'm hard coding the geometry name mainline. So wherever I put this item type expression, it would compute my start station relative to a piece of geometry named mainline. Now, that's not going to be the most flexible thing to do if you have to hard code geometry names. So a more realistic approach that you may use is to set up another item type property. So here I've set up two properties. I've got a reference alignment, which is just a text property. And that the user may key in a value, such as mainline. And then I've got my start station property that's got this expression on it. And what I'm doing is passing in the value coming from this property. So it gives you a dynamic ability with that expression. Now these do fully support reference files as well. So I can specify when I pass in the geometry with a dotted notation, a reference logical name as well. So in this case, if I had a reference file with a logical name of geom, geom.mainline would say, go to that reference file with a logical name geom and find the mainline in that reference file. You can use nested reference files here, so I could have something like geom.plan.mainline, where geom and plan are reference logical names, not the reference name itself, because that somebody could rename a file and break it. That's why we don't use that, but the logical name used for that reference to manage that. So these expressions do return numeric values, and then that numeric value can be formatted any way you want using the system string format function. So here I've got my civil expression station start expression in gray here. That's the core expression. And I'm embedding that inside of a system string format, and I'm presenting it the format that I want to use here. So in my example, I want a plus followed by 2 digits and then 3 decimal places, which would result in something like this. If you had a different format you needed, maybe you wanted the plus and 2 digits but no decimals, or you wanted plus and 3 digits, whatever format you needed, you could present that here, and that's how that would then be formatted. Now, it is important if you're setting up item type properties with that type of formatting, where you're including an alpha character like the plus sign, that you set up your item type property to be a type text so that it can include those alpha characters in there. So let's take a look at that. So here I've got some sidewalk, and I've already got the item type on there, but notice that these 4 expressions here, they don't have any data in them yet. They're not able to evaluate. As soon as I put in the name of the geometry that I want it to go process against, those will be able to evaluate. So they're now evaluating against the CR37, which is the center line of this particular roadway. The format of that, and the fact that I've got this extra text on the end, the bracket and the file name, or excuse me, the geometry name, that is all based on how I've set up that expression. We'll take a look at those in a minute, how those were set up. Likewise, with the start and end offsets, I'm showing an RT or an LT if they're on the left side here. That's all done with the format. If you didn't want LTs and RTs and you wanted plus and minus signs or just minus signs, that could be set up as well. If I make a change to my geometry, like in this case, I just changed the start station, you see the station values and offset values immediately update. I didn't have to go do anything else. All I had to do was make that change, and it saw that that changed and the expression updated. Now here's a different example where I got some sidewalk at an intersection. And currently I've got it computing the stations and offsets off that main line. But if I wanted to compute it off of this approach road or side road, I could change the reference over to that road name as well and point to that, and it would compute from those. Well, you may not want to point it just to one or the other. Here's an example where I'm going to point it to both pieces at the same time. And I want to bring together and show the start station and the off of both alignments at the same time. I'm showing those in a single expression here. So I've got the start station County Road 37 and the start station on the Farm to Market 12 road, all in a single string. I could have returned those in multiple strings. I could have included the names in there, not included the names. You have flexibility in how you want to set those up. I could have also set it up and said, well, I want to compute the start station off the main line and the end station off of the side road, if that was the need I had on this particular project. So a lot of flexibility in what you can do there. I want to take a look at another way we could use these start stations. I'm going to calculate a length of that value. So off that mesh element, I want to know what the total length was along relative to some measured piece of geometry, reference geometry. Now this one I'm going to return as a numeric value, and I'm going to use the units to format it. In my case, I'm just telling you to use the linear working units, or you could specify a different unit there. And the expression behind it would be the station end minus the station start. And that's going to give you that length value. Take a look at one more set of examples here relative to how this gets used. So this is a ramp gore kind of an area. So right as we're transitioning from our I-95 main line off to our ramp. And in this gore area, I've set up a whole bunch of different expressions here just to show you some different examples of how you might want to compute some of this. So I'm passing in both the ramp and the mainline alignment name. And then I've got some expressions in here computing just the start and end station along the ramp or the start and end station along the main line. You may want one, the other, or maybe you wanted both. So here's an example where we're computing both of those on the same lines, or an example where we're computing the length. Two different lengths, depending if I measure that along the geometry of the ramp or if I measure it along the geometry of the main line. So take a look at how these were set up. The two references are just text type properties that we could enter into. The single ramp or single mainline stations, this is the expression we've kind of seen before. We've got the core expression here in the middle where I'm computing the station start and I'm passing in the ramp reference alignment name. I'm formatting it with a system string format. And then I'm appending on the end of that a square bracket, the name of the alignment, and the closing square bracket. That's how I'm getting that alignment name on the end. The mainline start station, end station, same thing. We're just passing in a different reference alignment. If we look at the more complete one that's got all of it in it, it's just appending two sets of that together. So here's that first bit where we're computing it for the main line. We're appending that together and actually putting an ampersand in between the two of them, and then appending on the end the stationing coming off the ramp. So you first look at an expression like the one that's up there now. It looks pretty complex, but when you break it down to its individual pieces, they're quite easy to build. And here's the resultant of that, where we're got the mainline station, the mainline name, the ampersand, the ramp station, and the ramp name. And then the last one are the length computations. So we're just doing the station end, passing in the ramp reference geometry in this case, minus the start station of the ramp geometry, or the same thing coming off the mainline geometry. All right, moving on now to another topic. So we've gotten some feedback over the past couple releases that sometimes item types being displayed really kind of get in the way of things. And two particular areas that's true in are the tool settings window and the quick properties window. So tool settings window, think about something, for example, like I'm placing a geometry line. So I want to go place that, but that line's automatically going to put some item types on it. I probably don't want to see those in the tool settings window up front. You're usually going to deal with that later, or it's auto-populating those things. They just get in the way and kind of make noise on the screen or take up more real estate than you wanted to. Same kind of thing can be true with quick properties. That's the properties where you pick on an element, right-click, and get that hover over tool that pops up there, and you can pick the quick properties. You know, that's meant to be quick. It's meant to be get in and change one quick property in there and move out. And a lot of people don't really want to see their item types in there. So what we've done is we've added the ability for you now to control whether you see item types in those or not. If you disable the ability to see item types in either of those windows, then you'll see the window just like you always have, but no item types will be displayed. If you want to use that functionality, there are two configuration variables available to you. Civil tool settings omit item types, and civil quick properties omit item types. Define either of those, set them to true, and those item types will not show in those particular windows. It is important to note that item types are always shown in the full properties dialog. So you always can get to your item types in there to review them, to change them, whatever you need to do. The settings are only there to display for the tool settings and the quick properties dialog. We've done a lot of work in this release related to drainage, and I think we've covered some of the details of drainage in some other sessions, and you can see it in the README files. But one of the things that we've done relative to drainage is incorporated it more fully into item types in this release. Two important things that were done there, really important things that were done there, are number one, drainage is now incorporated into that single source of truth that I talked about earlier. That is the synchronization of item types between plan, profile, and 3D models. Drainage elements are now also supported on feature definitions. So that wasn't true in the last release. It supported it for geometry type elements, but not drainage yet. So that is supported. And we saw earlier the integration with the expression builder. You can get at all those drainage properties through the expression builder. We've not only made them available, we've also moved a lot of the drainage properties and actually store them on the elements now, so that things like annotation and item types can get at those drainage properties very, very quickly and efficiently. They don't need the drainage database to be open or even available to get at those properties. Now, you can still get at the full list of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drainage properties and UDX attributes in the database through here as well. But you don't need that in the vast majority of situations. So much improvement there in the way you can interact between expressions, item types, and drainage elements. Now, the next area that I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about is something called last valid value. Last valid value is not new in this release. So a bit of what I'm going to talk about here is a little diversion because it's not new in the release. There's one new piece at the end I'll describe. But for the most part, everything here has existed for many years. But what I do find is that it's not well understood by a lot of people. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time here and talk about what last valid value is, why it's important, and then the one piece that is new in this release. So what is last valid value? Well, or why is it important? It's important because it's that thing that makes item types work if you take it out of its native environment. So if you move it to somewhere that can't interpret the item type, it's kind of what steps in that case and says, okay, here's what you should use. So let's dig into that a little further. Before we get into the last valid value and understanding that, it's important to understand when an item type expression updates or when it gets evaluated. And this could be any kind of expression. This could be doing a lookup from a spreadsheet. This could be pulling a property off an element like its color, or it could be pulling a civil property off an element like a invert elevation or a feature name or something like that. So item type expressions are not constantly updated. They're only updated when you select an element. So it's an instantaneous thing. So when you touch on an element, any item type expressions that are on that element get updated right at that minute. If it needs to go update something from a lookup spreadsheet, it does it right then when you're selecting. So you can kind of think about, if I'm showing it in the properties dialog, it's being updated right then. So those are always up to date. But if you don't go touch an element and you don't do something with it, if it's just sitting there, a piece of graphics that has something on it, it's not updating those item types on that while it's just sitting. Now there's other things that updated as well. So things like, oh, I went and I touched the elements to publish them to an iTwin, or it touched them because it was pulling it into a report. So there's other functions that touch them and do the updates. But a good way to think about that is, if I could see it in the properties window, it updated then. And if I didn't see it in the properties window, it's not updated. Kind of an overall way to think about it. So then the question I'm going to ask is, well, then what happens if the expression does not update? Well, why might it not update? Well, let's say it's reliant on a lookup spreadsheet, but that spreadsheet isn't there. Maybe you're in a different workspace, or it's gotten renamed, or something happened. That might be a reason it can't update. Or maybe it's an item type that's reliant on a civil engine. It's looking for a drainage piece of data, or a civil piece of data, or a bridge piece of data, and you're opening up this file in pure MicroStation. And it says, well, I don't know what to do with that. I don't understand that civil data. So what should I do? Well, that's when last valid value steps in. So if it's enabled, which you do by setting the use last valid value to true here, if that's enabled, then those times when it can't evaluate the expression, for whatever reason, it says, okay, well, I know what I was the last time I evaluated, I'll just use that. Which is a good thing, because then your structure doesn't break if that file's handed to somebody else. So that then brings us to the question of, when does last valid value get updated or stored? That's more or less the same time that the item type does. So again, we're going to go back to our thinking that if I touched it, I see it in the properties window, it got updated. So okay, that's good. We kind of understand when that's updated. But now let's think about things like in a civil ruled environment. Let's go back to my sidewalk I had a little bit earlier. What if that geometry moved a little bit? Well, we know that the civil rules are going to fire, so that geometry changed. So let's presume the corridor updated properly, like it should, which rebuilt that mesh element for the sidewalk and moved it to its new location. But did it update the item types at that point in time? And the answer is no. Those EC expressions, or those item type expressions, are not going to refire and update in that situation, because you haven't actually touched that element yet and processed it. So this is part of making item types very efficient in your environment and not bogging things down. If you try to update, and I've seen realistic projects like this that may have in a corridor thousands, tens of thousands of item types in there. You don't want to bog it down every time you make an update there, trying to go back through and reprocess all of those. But you also want to make sure they're up to date when you need them. So it's a balancing game. So what have we done in the civil environment to take care of that? Well, before I go there, the first thing to remember is that if you're in that file and you're working on it, and those things have changed, and you try to do anything with it, you picked it and selected it, it's going to immediately update. So you're going to always see updated values. Or if you try to run a report on it or something like that, it's going to update. So you're always going to see updated values in the context of you're still in that file. So while you're running in there, not a problem. The system's designed to handle that. But what if you're not running in there? What if you moved that centerline geometry, that sidewalk moved, and you exited out of your file, and then somebody opened it up in MicroStation and wanted to look at those values? They would be out of date if we didn't do anything else. So what we do in OpenSite, OpenRoads, OpenRail is we automatically update every last known value when you exit the software. So when you close a file, we run through every element in that file and we update those. Now, before you panic, that is very fast. In 99% of the time, that takes less than 1 second to happen. And in fact, we've been doing that for the last couple of releases, and you haven't even known it's been happening. So it's just been happening automatically in the background. When you close a file, we make sure all the last valid values are up to date as part of the final step of closing that file before we move on to the next file. So that's all existing, just an explanation of how they work. What's new in this release? I mentioned that we've already doing this, and 99, probably 99.5% of the time, it's not an issue to anyone. There are some very extreme situations where you may have literally tens or of thousands of item types, and you may have some very extremely large models that you could see this taking 10, 15 seconds to do the update. Enough that it feels a little bit uncomfortable if it's taken 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Again, I want to stress that this is in very extreme situations only. But if you are in an environment like that and you do want to stop that auto update on close, we do now provide for you a configuration variable that you can set that will force it to not update those on close. Now, if you do that, you need to understand that you're taking that into your own hands to say, okay, I'm going to somehow update those things myself before I need to use them, let's say in MicroStation, or maybe bridging them to it or using a connector to create an iTwin out of them. If you do choose to do manually kind of manage that environment, we do also provide a macro. This is delivered with our workspace called item types LKG, or last known good. And that macro will do that update process for you. So you could use that then to go through and update your project, let's say before you connected it and built an iTwin out of it. This macro can be run on single files. It can be run on batches of files, whole folders of files, whole projects, using the batch processing utility. All right, the next topic I want to talk about is another one of my favorites that we've added. Everything that I'm going to talk about from this point to the end of the presentation has been added at our platform level. So everything else that I'm going to talk about is available in MicroStation, as well as all products built on it, like the Open Civil products. So this first one is what we call hierarchical pick lists. And that's the ability of one pick list to depend on another one. So for example, here I've got two item type properties, type of fruit and variety of fruit. And if I set my type of fruit to apples, my variety of fruit pick list would present only apple varieties. If I set my type of fruit to cherries, my pick list would present types of cherries. Now this is one item type property, and this is one pick list. This is looking at an Excel spreadsheet, and it's one single list, but I'm filtering it on the fly based on the value in this item type property. We're taking a look at this in a practical civil kind of an application. So here I've got an item type site set up for signs, and I've got a sign series pick list where I can pick a series. So I'm going to pick school, and then I've got a sign selection. So now the signs that are available in here are only my school signs. If I went and changed my sign series to regular railroad, then my sign selection list are only railroad signs. So I've built this hierarchy of pick lists where one is dependent on another. I've got it too deep. You could go deeper than that if it suited your needs. If you needed a third pick list that was dependent on the second. So how do we set that up? Well, let's go in and look at the item types behind this. First, I'm going to look at that sign series pick list. Nothing new here. This is the way it's existed for the last couple of releases. I've told this to go out and look at a pick list in this Excel file. I'm going to return a column. I'm going to go find the signs tab or sheet in that Excel file, and I'm going to return the series column. Just a columnar lookup, pretty simple pick list. My second pick list, though, is where we have the new capability. Now, part of this you could do in the last release. Part of this is new. So what's the same? Well, I'm still going out to an Excel file and I'm looking things up. I'm going to go to the signs sheet or tab in that Excel file, and I'm going to return the pick list name column. So I'm going to return data from the pick list name column. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter what I return by values in the series column in Excel. Which you could do in the previous release is then you would choose this Excel option now, but you would have to put in a hard-coded value. So I could have typed into here that I wanted to only return school signs, for example. But that would have been a hard-coded value in this pick list, and that's all it would ever do. What's new in MicroStation Update 17 or the 2022 R1 civil products is this new option to say, well, what I want to filter this on is another item type, and here I specify that item type, which is this property here. So whatever value exists in this property is going to be the filter that it matches up and then returns a value from here. We've also made some updates to how the lookup expression works. There were some limitations that many of you have asked us to improve a little bit here. So we can now support spaces and other special characters coming out of lookups. So if you notice this lookup file here, the sheet name or the tab name here has spaces in it. Some of these column names have spaces in them. The formatting's a little bit different here in the lookup to be able to support the spaces, but those spaces and special characters are now supported. A couple of new expressions that have been added, again, this is available in MicroStation or any of the civil products, are to compute latitudes and longitudes based on points. So you pass in a point to these expressions and they'll return the latitude and longitude. In this example, you can see here, I'm computing them both for the start and the end of a line. So I'm passing in the start point of a line, the end point of a line, and computing. You do have to have your files set up with a geographic coordinate system. They have to be at a known location on Earth so that we can do that conversion and have it be correct. There are examples of this provided in the civil workspaces if you're looking for examples of how these were set up with points and with lines. And the last area I'd like to talk about today is around item type or around text related to item types. So what has been implemented here is a faster way to place text at the same time that you're manually attaching an item type to an element. So here I've got the attach items dialog open. I could go and pick an item type that I want to attach, like for example, this ownership one. And what I see on the right here are the different properties that exist. So this item type had 3 properties in it, owner, descriptions. I could maybe type data into there. What is new though are these icons here. I want to point out because you're going to see these as you move around in the product. And what the heck do these do? Well, this is that ability to create or place text at the same time you're attaching it faster. When these have the slash through them, that means they're disabled. So if I went and placed this item type and I had some text in these fields, it would just attach the item type to the element and I'd move on, just like you've done previously. But if you click on these icons, the little slash goes away and you just see the icon without the slash through it. Then when you attach the item type to the element, immediately after attaching it, whichever pieces of text you have enabled here will show up on your cursor and you can place them immediately. There is a text style choice right within the attach item types dialog now so that you can pick your text style that you wanted to use when you attach this. The ultimate functionality here is not new. You could do this before, but it took a couple of steps. Once an item type is on an element, you can go to the text editor tool or the place text tool. You can insert a field in there, select the element, pick the item type, and place it. So you can always place item type text before. These options just give you a faster way to do that if that's a common thing you do in your work. Now, I do want to point out that these really have no effect if you're running with item types attached to feature definitions. Because when you attach those feature definitions and it puts the item types on there, you could be putting hundreds and hundreds of item types on at the same time, and it would get very overwhelming for it to stop for every single one of those and say, hey, annotate me, annotate me, annotate me, annotate me. So from a civil side, if you're attaching those item types on there, you're going to do that annotation still through your annotation groups and your bulk annotation tools. This functionality is really more for your one-off situations where you're going and manually attaching item types. And the last slide I have for you today is I want to point out a new view attribute that's been added in these releases called item type text. And the main reason I want to point this out is because I think it's a little bit misleading. It's an unfortunate way that this got named, because it really is not about item types. What it's really about is text fields. So this new view attribute here will toggle on and off all text fields, not just item type text fields. So for example, here I've got it enabled. I've got my annotation done on some horizontal geometry. So I'm seeing tick marks and some numbers and letters and stuff like that, whatever my appropriate annotation is. If I disabled this view attribute, what you would see is all those text fields, so all of the computed fields, the numbers and the letters and all that stuff is going to disappear. So I bring that to your attention so that you don't have that confusion and somebody turns it off and says, oh, I don't really care about item type text. And you're trying to figure out what the heck happened to all my annotations. So this is about all text fields, not just item type text fields. And that is all I had to cover today. So